Shields up, Ironbreakers, and welcome to Shadow of the Erdtree. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you who watch my content. Without you guys, I would never be given these opportunities, so thank you very much for the support. Naturally, I'd also like to thank Bandai Namco for providing me with an early access to the DLC so I could work on this coverage. Now, for the purpose of this review, I will be using some gameplay footage of Shadow of the Erdtree, but I will purposefully avoid ruining your personal journey of discovery by sticking to earlier areas and not showcasing any boss fights or even iconic weapons. However, I understand some of you will want to go in completely blind, so feel free to minimize this window and just listen to the review. It is also important to mention that this is a review in progress. Now, the reason behind this is because I haven't really finished the DLC. I fought a lot of the major bosses, but I've been utterly obsessed with revisiting older areas and trying to find new hidden paths, secrets, and quests. One of the questions that instantly arose around the time the DLC pre-orders went live was that of the price. After all, 40 bones for a DLC is a significant sum of money, but the reality is that this is much more of an old-school expansion rather than what the industry considers DLC nowadays. In fact, I would say this might be the single biggest DLC From Software has ever made. Now, I know my memory is not the best, but even looking back at my old playlists of Dark Souls 2 and 3, this DLC is bigger than the 3 Dark Souls 2 DLCs put together. It is also bigger than both Ashes of Ariandel and Ringed City combined, and it is most definitely much bigger than friggin' Limgrave! The amount of time you'll spend in Realm of Shadow is going to vary significantly depending on the type of player you are and how much time you like to spend exploring and delving into the mysteries the game has to offer. I know Fightin' Cowboy's first run took him about 35 hours. My run is currently coming up on 30 hours, but a few of those were spent with me just roaming areas I had previously cleared, trying to find new things and following up on quest clues and whatnot. So probably time actually playing and progressing is closer to like 27 hours. And after those 27 hours, just from looking at the map, I'm still missing what I assume to be a full legacy dungeon, a full large zone I haven't even set foot in, like I haven't even collected the map, so I don't really know what awaits me there. 4 to 5 locations that I've seen that I imagine are going to be something akin to a mid-sized dungeon, and a very important optional boss that I'm saving for later. So yeah, I still have a ways to go before I'm truly done with it, and the last thing I wanted to do is just rush to the finish line when I'm still having so much fun exploring and discovering new things just for the sake of making a review, right? But basically, I think the amount of content we're getting is definitely worth the asking price. If you enjoyed the base experience of Elden Ring, you will definitely appreciate Shadow of the Erdtree. However, if you didn't like the more open nature of Elden Ring's world, then this DLC isn't really going to change your mind. While the map of the Realm of Shadow is smaller and more condensed than the lands between, there's still vast expanses of land to cover and explore, and the overall experience is still very similar to the gameplay loop of the base game. Big open world sections to explore with legacy dungeons and mid-sized dungeons providing that more traditional Souls experience. With the overall landmass being smaller than the base game, From Software opted to greatly increase the verticality aspects of Realm of Shadow, which works really well for that vibe we always get in Souls games of, you see that castle in the distance? You can go there! Except this time, it's usually, I know there's stuff down there because I can see it, or I know there's stuff up there because I can see it on the map. Suffice it to say, if you enjoyed the kind of exploration you got with Elden Ring, there's plenty of that here, only more intricate with a bigger emphasis on verticality. In terms of the smaller dungeons, I feel they've been more meaningful with more interesting themes. Whereas a lot of the small dungeons in the base game were okay, but not particularly memorable, in the DLC, From Software has taken a more quality over quantity type of approach, where there's less small dungeons, but the ones that are there are more interesting to navigate and explore. For instance, without getting into spoilers, I distinctly remember the 2 ruined forges I visited, which are a new type of small dungeon that doesn't even feature a boss. Your objective is to actually find special weapons and upgrade materials, and the dungeon ends, in air quotes, when you find the main weapon associated with that ruined forge. And while we're on the topic of weapons, there's a lot of new equipment. I've been exchanging information with Cowboy, who's already finished the DLC, and so far he's found over 80 new items across weapons, spell tools, shields, bows, more than 30 talismans, and over 30 armor sets. Now, the cool thing about all this gear is that several items actually enable new playstyles that you'll want to tailor whole new builds around, like the Smith script weapons, which consist of thrown weapons like the daggers we got to see in one of the trailers, or the martial arts, which, by the way, is actually a ton of fun and very much viable. Now, I could say more, and I have seen a lot more. Oh my god, you guys wouldn't believe all the things I've seen. But I want to save as much as possible for you guys to enjoy and discover in your own playthroughs. So we've established in terms of quantity there's a lot of content in Shadow of the Erdtree, but what about the quality? How does it actually feel to traverse the realm of Shadow? And personally, it's been just like that first moment where you first open up the door and you're faced with Limgrave. Yes, From Software has managed to recapture that magical feeling of adventure you get when you first set foot in Limgrave. In fact, it's compounded upon, because with Limgrave your field of vision was limited by how far you could see. Whereas this time around, you'll be able to see even more if you just peek the edges of the map. You're going to be able to observe faraway lands you can't even fathom which path will take you there. This is probably why there's still a huge landmass in my map that I haven't been able to find my way into. Now, changing topics into questing, I feel that From Software has gotten better at organically guiding the player through its multiple quests, because I definitely have interacted and progressed quests more seamlessly in this blind run than I ever did in my first run of the game. Now, naturally, there's also a certain degree of experience from having a better understanding of quest triggers in Elden Ring, but even so, it feels like characters are better at informing you of what their plans are, which makes it more intuitive to follow up on their quests. Furthermore, NPCs are placed in better locations, at least in my opinion, or maybe I was just lucky with the order in which I've been completing events throughout the world. But one good example would be, you know how in the base game you have the quest of Selen and Jaren? I completely missed out on that quest on my first couple of runs because it involves some backtracking and it's not particularly intuitive. Whereas this time around I completed at least part of a somewhat similar quest line, and it felt much more intuitive as I came across the different elements of that quest organically with a lot less backtracking. Now, naturally, when it comes to questing, your mileage is going to vary, but for someone like me who always misses quests on a first run, this felt much more refined and rewarding. And speaking of rewarding, despite the common misconceptions about the brutal difficulty of From Software games, everyone that knows anything about these games is aware of the fact that one of the most important aspects of their design is the elation that comes from overcoming adversity. So let's tackle that subject. Is it challenging? And I guess we should start this by mentioning my experiences based exclusively on my personal save, where I entered the DLC in normal game, not New Game Plus, as I had recently made a brand new character on stream just to go through the DLC. This character was sitting at level 150 with a maxed out weapon. So I entered the DLC with a bit of a self-imposed challenge of not using spirit ashes to keep things a little more spicy. And so far the challenge levels have been pretty much what I would have wanted. Playing it this way has ensured that there's been enough friction to keep me humble, but not enough friction to completely overwhelm me. Again, keep in mind I haven't seen all of the bosses yet, and I've heard some horror stories in regards to the final boss, so this is bound to be a topic I'll want to revisit in a future video. Also, my decision to play this way shouldn't influence your own experience. If you want to use spirit ashes, you should, and as a matter of fact, I still might use them before I finish the DLC. So with Shadow of the Erdtree, From Software has implemented a new progression system, which is something that I was super curious to experience, as they want you to feel your character growing stronger as you advance through the DLC. So the way this works is, you'll find these special fragments as you explore the world. Usually you'll find them close to Mikola runes we've seen in the trailer. It almost reminds me of the glowing Erdtree branches you see sprouting out throughout the lands between, and usually you'll find a golden seed near them. It's kind of of the same thing here. That's not to say this is the only place you'll find them, as they are present in other locations throughout the world, but as you acquire these, very much the same way that you could upgrade your Estus flasks in the base game, you'll be able to upgrade your offense and defense exclusively in the Realm of Shadow, which means this doesn't really change anything if you go back to the Lands Between. There's also a spirit version of this resource you'll run into, which is going to upgrade both your Spirit Ashes and Torrent. With From Software introducing an upgrade system to specifically further upgrade your Spirit Ashes, it should definitely tell you that this is very much an intended mechanic they expect players to use in boss fights and encounters throughout the Realm of Shadow. So basically, don't let anyone shame you for using them. Personally, I felt the upgrade system felt fine. I could definitely feel my character getting stronger as I progressed through the DLC, which is usually somewhat of a struggle in previous Souls DLCs, as it was possible for players to enter DLC content over-leveled and overpowered, or under-leveled and underpowered. This way, theoretically, even players with min-maxed builds should experience their characters getting stronger, though I am very eager to hear how this all played out in New Game Plus cycles for other players. So basically, I've been collecting these bad boys like they're going out of stock, but even then, there were definitely still a couple of bosses that bent me over a barrel and never even bothered to wine and dine me first. They took me to Pound Town, and it wasn't a pretty sight. There were two boss fights in particular that I wasn't a fan of, and one of them was a Deathbird in the open world, and this was mostly because of the location of that fight, which was full of annoying ads, which just made the repeat attempts needlessly annoying. Now, the other one was a boss where I felt like the way in which From Software intends that fight to be played out doesn't really work because of the boss's toolkit. So basically, I just brute forced him by repeatedly slamming my face against him and ignoring most mechanics in favor of overwhelming damage, which still took a decent amount of effort. However, in the end, I did end up leveling past level 150, and this was simply because I wanted to use a really cool weapon I found that needed more stats for proper usage, which would have required me to nerf my survivability or damage. And also, I kind of got tired of always stressing out about friggin' 4.5 million runes in the ground ahead of every boss fight. It's like you die at the boss and then it's like, oh, there's just 4.5 million runes in the ground right there. And just my OCD brain would never be able to, get away from that. I was just like, but bro, the runes are there. You got to go in and you got to pick them up before you start fighting the boss. And in the meantime, you guys remember the comment we talked about Pound Town? Yeah, that's what the bosses were doing while I was trying to just get my runes back, But anyway, gameplay-wise, there isn't really much I can add without getting neck-deep into specifics that I consider to be somewhat spoilery, as I find discovering new playstyles and mechanics to be a fun part of the experience. So the overall sentiment is, I like the flow of the DLC even better than the flow of the base game. And this is potentially my favorite piece of From Software DLC to date. But I'm known to suffer from recency bias, so we'll see how this holds up in a few months. But for now, it feels super fresh and fun, and it is much more than I would have expected, both in terms of quality and quantity. Now, next up, I'd like to go over some of the visuals in the DLC, because it definitely feels like the artists wanted to flex their newfound mastery over the engine used during the development of Elden Ring. You see, the lands between are in a permanent state of basking in the light of the Erdtree. This affects the overall feel of the game, the day-night cycle, the vibe of each zone, so on and so forth. Now, the location of the DLC is called the Realm of Shadow, and their version of the Erdtree isn't really emitting any light, so as expected, the DLC is somewhat darker, particularly during nighttime. And I really wanted to shout out the art department for nailing the unique aesthetic for this place that manages to feel darker while still providing vibrant colors and sources of light in different locations, as well as an increased sense of contrast all around. In a lot of ways, it almost feels like the art style of a different game, but I really appreciate what they've done here. I've been more than impressed on several occasions throughout my playthrough. Beyond just the tonal shift in the art style, I somehow feel the world in the Realm of Shadow is also more detailed overall. This could be a consequence of the art team simply having a smaller footprint to work on, which allowed them more time to polish things up. Throughout most of the game, this also didn't really seem to have any cost to performance, with a small exception in one zone where things got a little framey, but other than that, it was smooth sailing all the time, playing 4K 60 on my 6900 XT. In terms of sound, there really isn't much to say. Everything sounds good, voice acting is solid, and the soundtrack remains consistent. If you liked it in the base game, you're going to absolutely love it here. The Shadow of the Erdtree expansion just serves to reinforce the desire I've expressed during the release week of Elden Ring, which is, I hope this game makes From Software filthy rich, okay? I want them to have all the money in the world, okay? So that they can keep producing games of this caliber, which are essentially quality games that prioritize the player experience over everything else. They are fairly priced, they don't compromise the developer's vision, and they don't nickel and dime you with microtransactions. So let's break this down real quick. Pros. The gameplay is still awesome. There's at least over 30 hours of brand new content. Personally, I think it's much more than that if you dig deep into the content, because there's a lot of stuff that's going to be hidden away in nooks and crannies throughout the game's world. There's also tons of new gear that unlocks brand new playstyles. There's more crazy Elden Ring lore. There's a brand new progression system for the DLC area that makes it so that you do feel stronger as you progress through the DLC. There are new dungeons and bosses and just lots of stuff for you to go and do. Cons. Replaying this is time consuming because you need to go back to kill Radahn and Mohg in the base game every single time, which still takes a considerable time investment. Two of the bosses annoyed me a little, I guess, and I got stuck in geometry a couple of times, which probably by the time you guys play the game is going to be solved because a lot of this stuff has been reported back to From Software. So, you know, in my opinion, this is an absolute no-brainer. If you like Elden Ring, this is the easiest recommendation of my life. But anyway, I'm done with this review. I'm gonna be real with you guys. I just want to get back to playing the game because I just found a brand spanking new weapon. I've upgraded that sucker to max level and I've been having an absolute blast blowing crap up. It's a ton of fun. I can't wait for you guys to see it. Also, I'm sorry that this review is scripted. Usually I do most of my stuff unscripted, but I haven't really been getting much sleep on account of pretty much recording every single day up until 2 in the morning. So if I hadn't scripted it, it was just going to be a huge incoherent ramble. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, bell notification icon, all of that jazz. I'll have more to say once I finish it, and naturally I'll be inviting Cowboy for a cons cast. Whenever that happens, we might even have a mystery guest. So hopefully you guys will look forward to that. But for now, that's going to be it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong, stay safe, peace out.